If the Vikings are going to spend a whole bunch to trade up for J.J. McCarthy, can he be the guy? Because he, kind of has to be. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to Locked On Vikings every single day. My hashtag everydayers. Hope y'all aren't getting sick of quarterback talk yet, because we've got a ways to go. Still a few weeks left of the draft, and then I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time talking about the actual quarterback the Vikings draft, whoever it is. So thank you all so much for hanging out. If you are new here, hello and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast. You can find this podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, whether it is an audio listening app like SiriusXM, for example, where you can also search out live games. You can search out like Timberwolves, get live hometown Timberwolves broadcasts, or Twins or Wild or whatever. You can also find this show on YouTube or on Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, I think let's pose a question that is at, I think, the center of any debate about J.J. McCarthy. We won't talk about what the price to trade up for J.J. McCarthy is, but suffice to say, if you believe all the reporting, it's extraordinarily unlikely for J.J. McCarthy to actually just fall to 11, for the Vikings to just get him, right? They got to trade up. And if they're going to trade up, and that's probably going to be fairly expensive, how does that become worth it, right? And that becomes worth it. I'm going to say the most shocking thing you've ever heard. It's worth it if he's the guy, right? If he's the dude, if he is the savior of the franchise, then you're never going to care about like the extra third round pick you had to throw in or whatever. If he's not the guy, then the impact of that is going to be increased, right? That said, the impact of pissing away 3 probably years on a quarterback that's not the guy is going to overshadow any draft pick compensation, if you ask me. That's singular players, but you're losing entire years of a team, right? You're losing Justin Jefferson's prime to missing on this. You may not miss on this decision. So what does it mean to hit then? Like, what do we need out of this? And what does it mean to be the guy? That's where I'll start here. And I guess I'll identify 2 things that I think you need from your QB that can kind of separate just like somebody that can throw a reasonably accurate football and can execute your playbook from somebody who can like actually win you the Super Bowl, can be a consistent contender. And truly, I think the only way we see in NFL history to have a contender that can be right back year in and year out is to have that dude at quarterback, to have the guy. And then your roster can have its problems, can have its ebbs and flows, but you'll always have the guy, right? And you'll always be in it. And that's truly the only way you can give yourself a remotely hopeful probability of actually winning the trophy, is to be in it every single year. You know, every team will have their 2009s, their 2017s, right? You know, everybody has their season where they explode, right? But can they come right back and do it over and over and over again? Otherwise, you got to get real lucky in that one year. So how can we look at somebody like J.J. McCarthy and determine if he can be that guy? And I'll point out 2 things. This is by no means comprehensive, but I think they'll be the 2 things we have time to talk about here. Can you steer the ship through stormy seas? That's the way I'm going to put it. But it's really important in a sport where you never get to just like show up and execute the plan, right? The best laid plans of mice and men, or is Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? Things go wrong in football. And in general, I think as like football fans, it's probably best to remember that a lot. Like things go wrong. You show up with a plan and then they show up with something you weren't expecting, or they show up with something else that you weren't ready for, and you have to find a way through it. And the best teams aren't the ones that preempt the most scenarios like that. The best teams are the ones that know how to live when they are throwing something at you you have not seen yet, and you got to figure it out on the fly. That's what separates the good teams from the great teams. I think about like Andy Reid and the Chiefs. There's so many over the last 2 years. There's 2 Super Bowl years, right? To back-to-back teams, which I guess they're the only team now that we can look at and say is successful, right? Everybody else failed. Everybody else lost. They didn't win the Super Bowl. So they're the one team, right? That's a good heuristic, right? That's responsible. But like, if you look at that, and part of what makes Mahomes so special is that improbability, right? The ability of, oh my goodness, I got pressure, I got to run around. But I'm not just talking about pressure, right? Like, you don't get to go through an NFL game without encountering pressure at some point. What does it do to you? I'm talking about, whoa, their coverage structures are different than I thought, right? Somebody got hurt. Now we got to change our game plan on the fly, that kind of stuff. And the Chiefs had gone through all of that and managed to continue. Mahomes has managed to continue operating at a high level despite having to change stuff about his game in the middle of seasons, in the middle of games, and has managed to continue to like he's had to go from like a deep shot quarterback to like a quick shot quarterback, to from a scramble quarterback to a Drew Breesy get the ball out of my hands quarter. He's had to do all of that at different points in his career, and he's been successful at all of it, and therefore the Chiefs have had that consistent success. And then on the opposite end of that, the other thing I'm looking for here is just consistency, right? I can't get this Jordan Love season out of my head that everybody's raving about, right? And there's these super, super sick highlights. You can go on to Twitter or wherever very often and find somebody posting an all 22 clip of him throwing to the most obscene, ridiculous pass you've ever seen, going, "Oh my goodness, what in the heck?" And those are awesome if they weren't interspersed with meltdowns, right? Love was good inconsistently, and therefore the Packers were good inconsistently. And as much as he drove them to 9 wins and a sneaky playoff berth, he also drove them to those 8 losses. Like he holds lots of responsibility for those. And so the Packers will live and die on how consistent Jordan Love can be. Not necessarily what his ceiling is, not even what his floor is, but what's in the middle. And that's one of the lessons, I guess, that I've learned in the last year or two, talking to a lot of people that are smarter than me, is that it's not about the tail of the bell curve, even though the tail of the bell curve is the thing that gets the most attention, right? The really cool pass, the really bad pass, right? The really good game, the really bad game. It's not about that. It is always about what you do on the mundane reps, on the regular 2nd and 8s, where you're just throwing a corner route, like just a nice little curl over the middle. What do you do on those reps? What do you do on every single play is going to be the most sustainable thing headed into the NFL. The way you drop back in college is going to be the way you drop back in the NFL, right? You can try to change it or whatever, and maybe you'll have to take a year to like reconstruct your footwork or whatever. But at that point, that becomes its own value thing, right? But if you like, I'm thinking of like Bryce Young. You watch the way he dropped back at Alabama. He dropped back that way in Carolina as well. And the Vikings actually used that against him and created some really gnarly pressures doing that in that Carolina game, that Week 4 game. That's going to be who you are, right? The way you throw the football, it's the way you throw the football. Now, the way that you responded to this 3rd and 6 against, East Carolina with, somebody chasing you and you're up 21-0, like that situation is that situation only. And the play you made there, it's cool, but it's not going to be what defines you. What defines you is your bread and butter, what you do every single time. And being able to like look at that and read that and decipher what is good and what is bad there is, I think, the learning curve that we should try to push ourselves on. So we'll apply this now to JJ McCarthy, who I think exists in the kind of middle ground, at least for me, where, I look at somebody like May or Jaden Daniels, who I like a lot, and I see, okay, those guys can be the guy. It's clear they can be the guy, right? And very few people disagree with that. And Mike Penix and Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler, are those guys the guy? I could see it, maybe don't count anything out, but I don't really trust it. And McCarthy is sort of in that middle ground where I don't know if it's, yeah, he's the guy unless something goes wrong, or no, he's not the guy unless something surprises me. And I think that deference to uncertainty is important to this, but he's between for me. And so let me just talk out whether or not I think he has those it factors, I guess you would call them. And we'll dive deep into them next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is a great place to find last-minute tickets to anything, whether it is a football game, basketball game, concert, theater, whatever you're looking for. You can get up to 60% off buying last minute for all of these things because of the way that these ticket sellers get really desperate once you're an hour into the event just to get something for their tickets, and Gametime can take advantage of that for you and pass the savings on to you. Plus, they're very upfront about everything. If you toggle the all-in pricing feature, you will see the total upfront, all fees, all everything included, so you know exactly what you're paying. No hidden fees, no last minute, haha, surprise, here's an extra thing. None of that from Gametime. You can look at your seat view before you buy, so you can make sure that you're satisfied with the view, and they have a lowest price guarantee. If you find the same section in row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey, thanks a bunch for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you are done here, if you want something a little bit less like hyper-specified and esoteric about JJ McCarthy, head on over to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, where I went over a lot of this stuff with actual tape, and it's going to be more visual than a podcast is, and you'll be able to maybe see what I'm talking about as well. But for everybody else, let me try to explain what I'm talking about here. And going back to my notes with this was kind of funny because so many of my notes when I was watching JJ McCarthy was just increasing vitriol at the Michigan receivers and the O-line. They really were bothersome. So I definitely get why they didn't pass. And I don't think that that's McCarthy's fault. Maybe a third thing about being like hashtag the guy is, you don't want somebody that's like carried by their supporting cast or whatever. And a lot of these Michigan guys are going to get drafted because of the way that they, the way that they approached the run game and the way that they contributed. But boy, that Michigan pass game was a mess and a half. And it gave us a lot of examples of that stormy seas. Who takes over when things are going wrong, right? And boy, we've seen a lot of different versions of that in Minnesota, right? When you're behind the 8 ball, you heave that thing up to Jefferson, right? Like he's the guy for that. And when things are going really poorly, I remember that was a big Percy Harvin thing, right? It's 3rd and long. Just get the ball in his hands and just let him go. He knows what we need to get. Go get it, right? That was huge in leading the Wolverines to the season that they had. And I'm not going to be, let me just like nip this in the bud right now. I will never be the kind of analyst that will be like, well, he won a championship, he must be good. Like, please, AJ McCarron is currently quarterbacking in the UFL. But like the trap that you fall into when you use that, I call it like proxy analysis, right? Because that's a proxy for actually analyzing a guy. You're making a leap in logic. You're going, well, he won a championship, and most of the time when the team wins a championship, the quarterback played well. So he's probably played well. but you're going from he probably played well to he must be good. And like you make that leap in logic. And that's the part where you get yourself into trouble. And I think it's the same thing with like, well, they ran the ball. They had a high run percentage, like run pass ratio. So they must not trust the quarterbacks. Like, well, must they? Must not they? You see the leap in logic that you got there? And they couldn't run every play, right? They had 3rd and 6s just like the rest of them. And if you look both statistically, and I think the tape bears this out plenty easily, McCarthy's best game came on 3rd down when he did not have the crutch, right? And if I recall, if you take Michigan's like run pass ratio and you adjust it to game script, which means the principle is teams run more when they're ahead, right? It has nothing to do with who's playing well or who isn't playing well. We've got a lead, we're protecting it, we're running, right? And if you adjust for that and you kind of downweight runs that happen when you're up by like more than 3 scores, they actually played it pretty normal. So don't freak out too much about the volume and the opportunities, but when things got weird, that is where I think we saw the best out of JJ McCarthy. Where you're not just trying to set up and do a go ball, not the shot plays. That was not his best, and we'll get to that. But the scramble drill, honestly, is the most exciting thing about JJ McCarthy for me, is the way that he, not only what happens when he bails on the pocket, but when he bails on the pocket, he's very judicious about it. And how he maneuvers the pocket to rescue pockets. You want to talk consistency, the footwork is really, really consistent with him, and it's good. You can tell he's well coached, and that means that's less you have to do when you get him in the building, right? That's less. It was actually Josh McCown I think it was on the Underdog Fantasy on a show with Josh Norris. He was talking about, hilariously, Bryce Young before he actually got the QB Carolina Panthers job, where he goes, this is this footwork thing with Bryce Young that works really well, and you're really happy when you see that because that means there's one less thing you have to teach him, right? And obviously there was other stuff that they had to figure out that didn't work out. A lot of problems in Carolina there. And the idea of was that Josh McCown's fault is an interesting question, but I digress. Point is, you like to see that just one less thing you have to worry about before he can get on the field. And that's why I don't really quite understand people who are like, JJ McCarthy has to sit a year. I think that's literally just an age comment, and I don't really respect that. Again, that's proxy, right? Well, young quarterbacks tend to have to sit a year. Therefore, this young quarterback should sit a year. It's like, well, you made a leap there. You jumped, you skipped a step. But okay, so the scramble drill. Here's the long and short of it. And if you want like a deeper dive, go find my wide left article on Caleb Williams over at Arif Hassan's Substack Wide Left. That was a whole tutorial on how the scramble drill works. It's very universal across teams, like way more than you might think. But basically the idea is you want to keep your depth, right? You don't want to drift backwards because running backwards is never good, right? You're just going to get yourself into more trouble. And you don't want to carve it too far downward until you're about to throw, because typically if you're throwing on the run, you do kind of want to like get running forward a little bit to help you with that throw. And you want to still have room to do that before you get to the line of scrimmage. So you want to keep your depth, right? And then plus you get too much closer to the line of scrimmage, you start bringing other defenders into it, causing more problems for yourself. You've got enough problems. You're already on the run. So he's really consistent about keeping that high. The throwing on the move is very good. There is a mechanical way to throw when on the run, when off platform. It's not just, raw, do you have arm talent kind of stuff. There's a way to do it. And he's very consistent about that. And that's super exciting. What he does when he is under pressure is, to me, the thing that I am jazzed about the most with JJ McCarthy. So can he steer the ship through stormy seas, that whole talking point? Yeah, man. He definitely can. And I think we just didn't have to see it a lot because of the school that he was at. And that's not his fault. That's just the deal with it is when we did see a 3rd and 6 where there was pressure, we saw what he could do, and we don't need to see 200 of those to trust what the heck we're seeing, right? There is enough of a sample to evaluate this guy. And I think to say that, he was ahead in most of the second halves, I guess he's just a big unknown, I think is coward's play. Go make a choice, right? Go look at the tape and go come up with an opinion for yourself. That's the way I feel about it, at least. But when you want to expand the sample and get ideas about like consistency, that's where we run into some other problems. So that will be what we talk about next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy, and it is convenient and flexible and suited to your schedule, which can be a big help if one of the barriers to getting into therapy is just not being able to find the time or not being able to get to like an office or whatever. BetterHelp is like the whole thesis of it is that it works for what you need when you need it and whatever you're comfortable with, right? Whether it's a phone call or if you're good with a video chat, you want that, or it all works. It's all available to you. They'll hook you up with a therapist that they think is right for you. And if you don't like that therapist, you can switch for no additional charge. So you can just kind of like bounce through therapists until you find one that works for you. And I think that's a really, really important part of the process of getting set up with therapy, because there are definitely therapists out there that just won't work for you. And then you'll think that that's the entire experience of therapy. And that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of diversity. So find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So let's wrap things up here on the Locked On Vikings podcast and talk a little bit about consistency. I put it on the little sidebar if you're watching on YouTube, consistent excellence. And that's what we're looking for, right? We are looking for the good things that you do to be to be something you do all the time. Not you did this really great thing and it was this really cool moment in a game where you had 6 other horrific mistakes, right? No, if you have a really great zippy pass, you have a great, like a bullet pass, Madden style, that needs to be every bullet pass, right? That needs to be every single time you zip it, it needs to be good, right? Not, he has this great bullet pass, he just misses it half the time. That's not a good bullet pass. And this is where we run into some issues with if JJ McCarthy can be the guy. And I think this is why I get so torn. When he is dealing over the middle, in the short and the intermediate, when he is trying to run this like rhythmic, this timing stuff, it is remarkably consistent. And I think for Kevin O'Connell, like we just talked about like the scheme fit stuff with Drake May last week, I think McCarthy checks that box big time. The kind of pick apart a zone part of quarterbacking, wait for a receiver to uncover on the linebacker and then deliver into a window before he gets to the other linebacker, that kind of stuff. Extraordinarily consistent. And that can definitely lead you to games where you just go up 3 scores by halftime and the game is kind of boring from there, which Michigan had a lot of, and then they had a good enough running game where they could close that out. That kind of stuff absolutely translates to the next level. And where you lose consistency, and calling it inconsistent is probably a little bit overly apologetic, is when you get to these deep sideline shot plays, right? I don't even mind like the post, like the over the middle, but it's to the sideline. And this is sort of morphed into a narrative of JJ McCarthy can't throw left. And I think that's because at the combine, he missed a couple of the left. I don't remember. I didn't note particularly which were to the left and which were to the right, but I noted like sideline passes are rough, whether they're like out routes or like deep out routes, right? If it's just like a timing, like a flare out or something like that, or like a little 5-yard kind of thing, like that's fine. But when you get to like a 15-yard, like corner routes, go balls, that kind of stuff, you get wildly inconsistent accuracy. That is bad. And the article that I actually wrote about McCarthy when I was doing my series of QB articles was about this, about the deep ball and what changes on deep balls, and a theory for why I think JJ McCarthy's is bad. And then if that is fixable is a whole nother question that's probably best answered by whoever his QB coach ends up being. But basically, it's a thing with the way he aligns himself with the way he aligns his feet when he throws, and you couldn't tweak it. It's like a mechanical tweak thing, and I do think that if you did tweak it, it would help. But tweaking a mechanical thing in a quarterback's throwing motion will always carry risk in the same way. If you're a golfer, if you try to change your swing, you might ruin everything. So it's your riddle box to open if you want to. But that is going to be the nature of things. And so if you can't get a consistent deep ball and you can't get that explosiveness, those shot plays, you're going to have to be ultra consistent on all the other stuff. You can West Coast your way down the field like this. And in fact, going back to Mahomes in 2022 more than 23, they had to live that way. They would do these 13, 14 play drives without any explosiveness at all. They would do, run play and then just slants and stick and just really simple stuff, executing really perfectly and consistently all the time. And because they had that pitch in their bag, everyone is playing too high and taking away our explosiveness problem that the Chiefs have dealt with for the last couple of years didn't end up stopping them, right? They still won all of those games and won both those Super Bowls. So having that pitch is really great, but the Chiefs didn't have to be like that every single game because they wouldn't see that super heavy, too high, super hyper conservative zone thing every single game. Some teams would play them different and then they could play a different game. That didn't require as much ultra consistency. That was maybe a little bit more susceptible to mistakes. That's what's great about explosive shot plays is you don't need to hit 100% of them. You need to hit half of them. And I don't think McCarthy hits half of them, right? That's we need to get that up. That's the biggest thing that I think he needs to work on before he, to me, can be the guy. Is I need that explosive element that can pair with a consistent element, because if you have the consistent first down throw that you can get 6-7 yards on every single time and set yourself up with a whole bunch of second and shorts, and then you can pay those off with explosive passes, then you're going to have this really sick cadence and this, really favorable situations all of the time. But if you can't do that, then all you're doing is giving yourself some nice 3rd and 4s. We don't want 3rd and 4s. We want touchdowns. So to put it all into perspective, this is the kind of consistency that can ruin you for, let's say it kills you every 4th game, right? Well, that makes you an untenable quarterback. That makes you no longer a reasonable NFL quarterback if you get smoked once every 4 games on really bad consistency. Now, because it's just one facet, it's just deep balls to the sideline. Okay, that's not going to kill your entire game 1 out of every 4. But 1 out of every 4, you have no explosiveness, right? And if you just think about the nature of an NFL season, if you can't be consistent for 4 games in a row, you can't win the Super Bowl. Both because the playoffs are 4 games long, or maybe they're 3 games long for the 1 seed, and you probably had to win 4 games in a row to be the 1 seed at some point in the regular season. So you have to be consistent. You have to be able to week in, week out, drive in, drive out, play in, play out, be the same guy. And I think certain parts of McCarthy's game, the scramble drill, the intermediate timing stuff, absolutely have that. And I'd be really excited about him for those reasons. And to me, those things overshadow not really having a deep ball. But a part of the reason that it overshadows it is because I see that as fixable. And that is not a take that I'm exactly going to stake my life on, right? Like, I'm no QB coach, and I don't know if the QB coach is going to even want to try to do the fix that I think would fix this. And I don't even know if I'm right about that. So big grain of salt on that, but at least it's like, okay, if he can get a consistent deep ball, this dude can be the guy. And if you're looking for the definitive answer, if you think I've beaten around the bush too long for half an hour here, if he can fix his deep ball, he can be the guy. I believe that wholeheartedly, but there's a qualifier on it, which is going to be why you're torn. So what do you do for a guy that can be the guy, but with a qualifier? And I think if you pitch to me, well, we'll try to get a guy that doesn't have the qualifier, but barring that being impossible because the Patriots decide not to trade down or whatever, we're going to get this guy that can be the guy, but has a qualifier. Okay, we'll do that. And we'll try to, work with the qualifier. We'll see if we can't save a little bit more since we're getting that much worse of a guy. But ultimately, you're back into that Brandon Beane quote of like, nobody cares about what we drafted, what we paid for Josh Allen. And if Josh Allen didn't work, nobody would care what we paid for Josh Allen because we'd all be fired. This is the next guy's problem. The next guy's problem. And that is a team building thing that I don't think gets enough attention. Is nobody gives a crap what the next guy's problems are, right? If you're getting fired, you're getting fired. But conversation for another day. Hey, tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday, so why don't you get your questions in? You can send them to me at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Just shoot me an email or fill out the Google form in the show notes, and then I'll always put out a call on Mondays on Twitter, so you can also answer me there. I will see you all for that, and as always, Skull.